Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Manifesting Lab members webinar, chosen indeed by the members, and it's on the subject of relationships, a topic that is considerably complicated, and I shall attempt to simplify it to Manifesting Lab levels, which means if I can understand it, hopefully someone else can. So let's launch into this and see what you're going to learn. So the first thing you're going to learn in this super simplified, complexity discarded webinar is, usefully enough, how to reduce millions of books, videos, articles, and other stuff about relationships into one easy to understand vibrational diagram. Not only that, you're even going to learn how to use that diagram for yourself. As a result of that, this is going to be quite an interactive webinar. We're going to be playing a little game a bit later, whereby you shall have some experience, hopefully, in putting this information to some use. Also, you're also going to learn why there's probably a lot of things you are doing in your life right now that you need to stop doing immediately. And it will probably shock you how many of those things there are in your life right now, but we shall get to that shortly. Now, given that this webinar is about relationships, I have a question for you. Why are we even doing this webinar? Why are relationships important? If you have an idea, please give me a quick answer. Because if they're not important, I might as well stop this webinar now. But obviously, you who have attended think they are important. So why? And remember, with relationships, we're not just talking about romantic relationships. The whole field of relationships covers friendships, acquaintances, people you bump into in the street. There's a vast array of things that can come under the umbrella title of relationship. Although I do understand that most people think of relationship as being a romantic kind of thing. So we got a few answers coming in here. Someone saying that most of the world is a co-creative experience. Another one saying you can't help creating them in your experience. So I guess that's the people on the other side of the relationship. And then we got another answer here. Because you always need to interact with people to do and achieve things. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And more than that, I'm going to add to that we define ourselves in terms of our relationships. It is quite interesting. If you think about the labels that we use so often and don't think about, things like I'm a brother, I'm a sister, I'm a mother, I'm a son, I'm a daughter, husband, employee, boss, worker. In fact, the first thing we often ask people is, what do you do? Because what they do defines who they are, and what they do is in relation to other people. Because even if you say you do nothing, that still means that in relation to others, you're not interacting. So even shutting yourself off from others defines you as someone that does that. So in other words, to put it in a nutshell, everything you are in comparison to someone else. That's almost how we know who we are. It's absolutely the case that we co-create with others on this physical platform. But it's interesting that there's almost no way around it. It's interesting that we use solitary confinement as a punishment. So cutting yourself off from others is not something that people generally want. Now, as a result of this co-creation, I thought it would be appropriate to make this quite a co-creative webinar. So especially when we get towards the end of this webinar, something that I'll be calling the connection game, you will, or you might like to take part in this co-creative little game. And as a result of taking part, you may get some insights about relationships that you don't currently have. In this webinar, I'm going to try to get everyone on the same page first of all. So here we have the webinar map. Now, for those of you, obviously, who've been here before, you know we go around the map in this kind of direction. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try and get everybody to the same level of understanding about relationships. I'm then going to shake up a few assumptions about the relationships. And then we're going to play this little game where the knowledge you've gained from that knowledge that you have hopefully absorbed can be applied. And when we play this game, by the end of it, you should be somebody that can go into any relationship situation, figure out why it's not working and what to do to fix it. And you should be able to do that in a couple of minutes. So hopefully I won't put large numbers of people out of work in the relationship industry, but you never know. You never know. I am going to attempt to simplify relationships to the point that it is almost idiot-proof. We shall see. We shall see. So let us launch into this highly hyped up webinar on relationships, and let's see if it meets the hype that I've given it. So first of all, let's talk about some traps that I think people fall into regarding relationships. This part of the webinar is going to be shaking up your thinking a little bit, provoke you a little bit, try and knock you out of any ruts as far as relationships are concerned, because it's very easy to start thinking in very habitual terms about relationships, and often in ways that limit you quite a bit. So the first thing I want to ask you is almost, why are we having a webinar on relationships? Because surely we've spent all this time in the manifesting lab learning to manifest things like red cars. So why do we need a special webinar on relationships? What is the difference between manifesting a relationship and manifesting a new red car? Because surely it's the same thing. Or is it not? What do you think? I'll give you a minute or two just to have a think about that and see what you can come up with. We got somebody saying that they are actually the same. So the implication is that manifesting relationships is the same as manifesting red cars. Anyone else have a different point of view? Right, so we got a few other answers coming in here. Right, so I'll read these out because while I understand the point of view of somebody who thinks they are the same, they must be different enough that we're having this webinar on it. Or maybe you think this is just a webinar for the sake of having a webinar. But it seems like other people don't think so, and I don't think so either. I think there's a difference. So I'm going to read out some of these answers. So one person is saying it seems different because those, and I assume they mean the cars, are inanimate objects, or as opposed to living. So I think what they mean to say, sorry, the sentence isn't quite complete. I think they're trying to say that the cars are inanimate objects as opposed to the relationships. That's why they're different. And then there's another person here saying, there is another person involved who also has free will, and we can't create in someone else's experience, but we can focus on the essence of what we want in a relationship. And there's another person here saying manifesting a relationship is more of an evolving experience. It changes over time more than a car. So I would agree with those previous three answers, that because what I would say is when you have something like a car, which we perceive as a non-thinking, inanimate material object, we perceive that as having stability as far as vibrational work is concerned. We can get our new red car, we can put it in our virtual vortex, and we can appreciate it. And we can have fun thinking about all the things we can do with it. And then the next day, we can come back and the car is still there, nice and stable, and we can appreciate it a little more and do that day after day. We can kind of have fun with the thought of the new red car. The problem with relationships, which involve people, is that people change. So today I could write a load of nice, good stuff about somebody I know, and I could really appreciate that person. And then overnight they could do something really annoying and frustrating. And now I come to read that thing tomorrow in my virtual vortex, and those words of appreciation I will want to scribble out and hit the delete button on, because they're now different. This, in my view, is the fundamental issue. Despite the fact that we can treat relationships and red cars almost similarly, as far as manifesting is concerned, the stability is lacking in relationships. This is why I tend not to put any kind of relationship into my virtual vortex. So as someone is saying here, it's a moving target. Yes, absolutely. This is the problem. It is a moving target. People keep changing. So I have very few relationships in my virtual vortex. Now, that's not strictly accurate because there is a method called proactive positive aspects, which allows you to get away with putting relationships in your virtual vortex. But that's not what we're going to cover in this webinar. That's for another time. But generally speaking, it's a risky business to put people in your virtual vortex and find good stuff about them and focus on them and all that sort of thing, because they just don't stay still. One exception to that is a person that you no longer know, or a person you haven't met for a very, very long time. There, the lack of changeability you can almost treat as an inanimate object. And so in that case, you could almost treat that person as a new red car. But that works when they're not in your experience. And so you haven't really manifested them. You've kind of de-manifested them. So it's that lack of stability that causes all the trouble in relationships. And you will find as we go on in this webinar, that lack of stability is what causes pretty much all the problems in relationships. Ultimately, all relationships, in order to make it work from a vibrational point of view, have to be about you. Because if they're not about you, they're about this moving target. And you cannot control another person. I'm sure all of you are old enough to have realized that by now. Other people are going to do what they want to do. So by necessity, if we are going to have any influence on our own reality, it has to come from us. We cannot trust another person to stay stable enough to allow us to use them in some vibrational way. So we have to consider really that there is only one relationship that matters, and it's the ultimate relationship. It's the relationship between us, the physical us, and that non-physical us. Now, as we go on in this webinar, I'm going to represent the non-physical, broader self. You can call it inner self, inner being, higher self, many, many different words. But that broader self and that physical self, I'm going to represent with this kind of diagram. Now, you're going to see this diagram again and again in different ways. Because this, first of all, is the ultimate relationship. It's the relationship between the physical you, which is like a small you, and the broader self, which is a big you. Now, we've spoken about this many times in the Manifesting Lab. I'm not going to go into the details here. But where relationships go wrong, again and again and again, is that we have something that's blocking the relationship, which is the ultimate relationship. And so we seek to compensate for that block by something else. In fact, you could argue almost every problem in the whole of life is down to that. It's that we seek a connection that's missing from somewhere other than the only place that works. When this connection between the physical you and broader you is impaired, we can call that a void. And then all our human behaviors that seek to fill that void, they're never going to match up to what we feel when we are connected with who we are. When we are connected with who we are, that's when we feel the best we can possibly feel. That's when we feel joy, passion, fulfillment. All the positive emotions come from varying degrees of connection with that broader self. When you don't have that connection, that's where all your relationship problems come from. And really, looking at that diagram, it's probably where every problem in life comes from. So if I was to sum up this entire webinar in one sentence, so that if you wanted to stop now, you could, and you wouldn't have to learn anything else, it's that love yourself first. That cures everything. Everything in your life. Cured. Done. Not only that, if you love yourself, you'll naturally attract others who love themselves also. Now, we're going to delve into this very shortly, into more detail, but that's the way it works. When you have filled that void of darkness, of lack of connection, with connection, it encourages others to seek their connection also. So in this webinar, there are two terms going on. There's the void, which is the lack of this connection, and then there is the connection. In life, we are all seeking the connection. Now, let's expand upon this concept a little bit. And let's delve into, let's make that diagram just a little more complicated. What we've now got are two broader selves and two individuals. And using this diagram, I'm going to explain the difference between romantic love and unconditional love, because all relationships are varying degrees of love. Now, you may be thinking, hold on a second, what? I go to the checkout person at the supermarket. I don't love them. Yes, you do, actually. You do. Because instead of using the word love, use the word connection. And then you'll start to see things in a different way. All influences that occur to us, as far as relationships are concerned, elicit from us different degrees of connection. So if you go to that checkout person at the supermarket and they do something that annoys you, they've had an effect upon your connection. They've actually affected the way you love. Because what love really is the connection to our broader self that I was talking about on the earlier diagram. So this is what unconditional love is. It's that you have a full connection. The word connection and the word love, in a metaphysical, spiritual sense, are interchangeable. So you do love that person at the checkout. But if they annoy you, you don't love them that much. It's just a different degree of love, because you have to have some kind of connection for them to even exist in your reality, because otherwise, how would you observe them? So this is what unconditional love is. Unconditional love is the idea of just holding this connection despite the fact that you see somebody else that's behaving in a way that causes you to decrease your connection, or would cause you to do that. If you can hold that connection regardless of what anyone else is doing, that's unconditional love. Unconditional connection. The problem with the word love is that it's been so misused over the years that we've created this thing called romantic love. Now, I'm not being offensive to anyone that's really into romance. I'm just explaining it from a spiritual perspective. Romantic love is almost the opposite of unconditional love. It's a conditional love. So let's say that this is some individual that you like, and you like them quite a lot. And let's say that when they do stuff you like, that makes you happy. So you observe them, they do something that you like, that makes you happy. In other words, that gives you an excuse to allow your connection. That's what happiness is. And then when you observe something that they don't like, or that you don't like, then you disallow your own connection. What romantic love is about is that you will keep doing things that please me. The phrase that tends to get used is you complete me. And that is a problem, because if you require this other person to behave in a certain way for you to be complete, now you have given all your power to that person. And the problem with other people is they themselves want their own connection. So they're likely to act in a way that isn't entirely focused on you, but is focused on their connection. So they behave in a way that pleases them, but that then displeases you. Now you're a slave to their behavior. This romantic conditional love is doomed to failure. This idea that there will be somebody who will come along and they will fill that void within you, that darkness, with their own connection, with their own behavior, it's asking for trouble. And yet this is what so many people chase, that romantic love, where they themselves can be sloppy and have no connection whatsoever, but through this connected person who behaves in a way that pleases this person and even floods this connection over that person, that means that you can be lazy, not be connected, and rely totally on them until the day comes when either they get disconnected or they do something that displeases you. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So we are going to come back to this diagram later. This is the diagram I spoke about. When you see this diagram and you understand the subtleties of it, you can analyze and fix relationships very, very quickly indeed. It doesn't necessarily mean that what is required to fix that relationship is an easy thing, but it does mean you know exactly what is required. So you're halfway there. In fact, much more than halfway there, if you can figure out what's going wrong. But following on from this notion of romantic love and unconditional love, there is one other thing that I think really gets in the way of people and relationships. And I am now talking in terms of loving relationships as opposed to a checkout person at the supermarket. And that is this issue of the one relationship.